So I am, that story reminds me of how strange, Rachel's story reminds me of how, strange it's all been for, I'm sure all of us. Our hospital had changed, as I'm sure many hospitals changed, to accommodate this demographic of severely ill patients who basically became the primary majority of people that we treated. And so effectively our hospital became an ICU hospital. And so as, I've read in, op-eds and just hearing people talk about it, when I've talked to people outside of the hospital who imagine like the walls crashing down, the thing that I think was most amazing for people who are not in the hospital culture is how quiet it was. And how quiet, everybody was, even though it was filled with critically ill patients, because everybody was in respiratory distress. And so they're struggling to breathe, and we know how that is. And so I had one such episode where I was sitting in an overnight, looking over basically 20 to 30 critically ill patients, and it was enormously quiet. And all we could hear is the beeping and the occasional sounds of discomfort, that we've been grown to accustomed to, and sort of the pre-COVID ER ambient noise level. And then something kind of rang out that was uncharacteristic, because I hadn't heard it in seemingly, it doesn't take very long, a couple of weeks of treating COVID before you start like thinking like, oh my goodness, someone's feeling like, I could hear somebody screaming in discomfort. And, in my mind, I'm cycling, okay, what could that be? It's probably something that, either we're putting in an IV for someone who's not accustomed to it, or typically like a Foley placement. And in this case, I look up and I knew the nurse was placing a Foley in a patient that we were watching fluid status on. And hearing the screams was a reminder of like how far we'd come into this sort of getting used to the new reality of treating COVID, which was this enormously, deathly quiet emergency room. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that the sounds of discomfort were particularly welcome, but there was a feeling familiarity that kind of reminded me of what things were like before COVID. And at the time I was thinking like, maybe this is going to be the new reality. Like this is COVID and then pre-COVID, and like everything's going to be defined on as opposed, based on that, whether it's the medicine, because we're seeing all these sort of like oxygenation needs that were different than anything we'd been used to, and all these sort of fluctuations in D-dimer and ferritin, and depending on what your hospital is testing for, but things were just thrown completely out of scale. And so I was thinking, oh, this is a reminder of what things used to be like. And then there was this obvious kind of like, and then there was this prolonged, scream of, something, and this patient was demented, so she wasn't quite aware of what was going on, so she was just screaming out, as we're used to hearing for patients who don't really understand what's going on with them. And the weirdest thing, she started screaming, and then this prolonged scream that kind of like rose and then steadied into this amazingly beautiful held note. I can't do it because I'm not professionally trained, but it was like a, oh, and it was like this held note. It was operatic, and it was just, you could tell it was tremulous in this sort of like, just beautiful. It literally held people in a moment that note hovered above everyone else. And you realize like this woman, we don't know, this patient was someone who was, a demented elderly patient, and, and we knew what her past medical history was. But this one moment of this note being held above everyone and hold everybody captive suggested a life that she had had that no one was really, you weren't going to find in the chart. And it was this extraordinary moment of humanity that everyone in the ER that heard the note in this sort of like unexpected way, connecting this common experience to this one patient who couldn't have intended it because she wasn't aware of what was going on. And it was just this wonderful moment where everybody, there was nothing spoken about it. We just all looked at each other in surprise, like just genuine surprise, and this really like marvelous pleasure that we'd all sort of like found this humanity in this moment, in this dark time, in this quiet, deathly quiet hospital where we're covered with PPE, and we could, you know, the people we were working with, all of the team just kind of met eyes and just shared this experience of pleasure. And it was most unexpected, but I'll never forget it. It was, you know, it reminded me of these amazing little surprises that you come across in what we do.